Welcome to the Journey. I am Kevin Polky, and I'm the host of the Journey. And the Journey is a show that focuses primarily on stories of transformation. Sometimes it's an individual who've had some setbacks in their life, or maybe have had career changes, or they find themselves with some obstacle or some setback in their life, and then not only do they talk about what the setback was, but more importantly, talking about what did they learn from that, and then how are they giving back because of that, because of what they learned. And today we have a very special guest, Theresa Gasser. And so, Theresa, welcome to the journey. And
Thank
I,
you.
I know we just have recently, in the last few months, gotten to know each other a little bit because of both working for Refresh Mental Health. And well, why don't we start there? What do you do for Refresh?
I'm the Vice President of Learning and Development. So I get to do all kinds of really fun, exciting teachings and trainings and really using my creative side, tapping into the part that I love the most about life is being creative. So it's really a great job and a great company. So
And so, Teresa, with that, this is primarily within Refresh, and for Refresh employees, and it's not necessarily our compliance. Uh, all the different things they have to do with compliance, but it is for further professional development, correct?
correct, correct. So we do a lot of things around CEU, CMEs for our staff, but we also work on things for our support staff. So we call them our gatekeepers, the frontline people who
Sure.
take the phone calls and interact with patients long before we interact with patients. So it's really exciting to have them on board and to really just care about the entire system. So it's Refresh has taken this nice stance of taking care of everybody within our community. And we call them, this is our community. We're all over the country, as you know. So it's nice to be able to connect people to each other. We have things like military support network. So we support our military at Refresh. And we want our staff and our clinicians to be trained to really understand those intricacies of the military. I come from a military background, which I'll talk about later. So that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited about that. But we also are doing support networks for our single parents, LGBTQ, just you name it. We're coming up support networks within Refresh for our staff. So they feel supported in what they do. And being in mental health, it's key that we support each other. It's a kind of an isolating job at times when you're doing therapy and you're back to back with patients, and it's really nice to have a group of people that come alongside of you and support you from an education standpoint. But learning and development's but much more than just education. So
Absolutely. And there's no doubt, even though in the last 2 years, because of the pandemic and because of
mhm.
a larger percentage, a growing percentage of our providers working from home, so even some of that aspect of where we could have that community within the office for some locations, that has really not existed in the last 2 years. So
No, it hasn't. And mental health, the crisis in our communities with mental health is much greater than it was prior to the pandemic. I mean, when I'm talking to providers in the community, the biggest thing they're saying is the number of people seeking mental health treatment has skyrocketed.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's really
and
important.
and I think it's probably a combination of different things. One, I think because of the different aspects of that's happened in the last 2 years, as a result of the pandemic. But then I think there is some of the stigma that used to be around seeking help seems to have diminished and really changed, and that it's okay to seek out behavioral health support. And so that I think has been a big shift, as well as there actually has been an increase in need, but there also has been an increase in willingness to seek out help.
Oh, absolutely. Which isn't that the greatest thing ever, too.
Oh,
I'm so excited about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Everything we're touching on is kind of my
sure.
journey to where I am today. So
Yeah.
it's really amazing to me to see how far we've come from a mental health standpoint. Unfortunately, there's still people out there who really have a stigma against mental health or really don't understand where we are and who we are as clinicians and what we're doing. And therapy, I think, has advanced so much over the past 20 years as well. So it's exciting to see people who were really turned off by therapy 20 years ago, who for whatever reason have decided to come back and are like, wait a minute, this isn't the therapy I knew before. And
Right.
so it's really exciting to see, just see them grow as people once they realize, wow, I can really move forward here.
Absolutely. So Teresa, why don't I know we got jumped way ahead of ourselves, but
Yeah, we did.
why don't we start with so one of the questions I always ask every one of my guests is I ask, what does Teresa do for fun if you have the opportunity to have some downtime and have fun? What does Teresa do for fun?
Well, first of all, I value my downtime so much. I've learned, I'm a little bit older, so I've learned you have to take time for yourself, or you can't be good to the people that you're treating, or the people you're supporting that are treating people. So that's number one for me. But so I love boating. Unfortunately, we've had a little bit of a cold winter, so we haven't had much boating in Mississippi where I live right now. But during the summer, I boat a lot, and I love going to the beach, and I love to read, and obviously, I love to write. I could read a ton. I used to think I read a lot until one of my colleagues told me she reads about 20 books a week. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I do nothing else on my downtime but read. And I thought I was doing good with maybe one or two books a week. So, but I like to read a lot. I have some pseudo grandkids. I have a niece who I help raise on and off. And she has five, no, yeah, she has five children now. Yeah, five. So I had to count. Isn't that horrible? She just had
Yeah.
her baby in January. So I love doing that. And I very close to my family, so my nieces and nephews, and take care of their kids and help them as well. And just love to do some Southern things. It's Mardi Gras week, so I had three parades this weekend, so I'm a little burned out, paraded out, but
Sure.
it's been fun. So yeah, I just like to really be with my family. And I have a wedding coming up. My son's getting married on Friday to a beautiful woman who we absolutely adore. So very excited about that. And so we have wedding week this week. So yeah, so very busy.
Very nice. So why don't we kind of just tell us a little bit about your backstory? Where'd you grow up,
Yeah.
and then obviously you mentioned that you're a clinician, and so how did that all come about? So, but first, where'd you grow up, and
Yeah,
what if
so my story is a little complicated. So
okay.
I am a Navy brat. So I grew up all over the place. I was born in Boston and then moved to Memphis, Tennessee. And then we moved to South Carolina, and then we moved to Iceland all before I was 4 years old.
Oh,
So it was a lot of moving and shaking. My first memories were in Charleston, South Carolina, and being on the beach. So probably why I love the beach so much. Then we moved to Iceland. You'd think I'd like the cold after 2.5 years there, but I didn't love the cold. Very, very cold there. But loved Iceland, and really kind of sparked my love for travel. I didn't tell you I love to travel as well. So it really sparked that interest in seeing the world. And I've been very fortunate to have gone all over the world. And I'll tell you that in a minute. But I grew up in a really very dysfunctional home. So we were three children, and we had very abusive parents. They were not very nice people. Um, Probably why I have such a heart for mental health and people getting help, because I can see what happens when mental health is gone when it's not well and it goes unchecked and untreated. And so we had a very difficult time growing up in our family. But we really, I can say this about my sister and my brother and I, we're very resilient, and resiliency is a huge key, I think, in what we go through and how we overcome some things. But we were really blessed to have some amazing support people. My grandparents moved next door to us when I was in the fifth grade. We settled in Mississippi, and that's why I'm down here. My father would travel with the military, and we stayed put. So that was one of the first steps that really took. It kind of became formative in me becoming who I was. I was able to finally get some roots and ground a little bit, and then really got some amazing supportive people around me who didn't really know what was going on in our home, but were really just loving, kind people, and really showed me that. And my grandfather, who I still to this day, he's my favorite person who's ever walked the planet. His son was close second, my uncle Louis, who passed away last year, unfortunately. Those two were just key in my life, and showing me that men could be really healthy and good, and that people could be really good. And so I really started focusing on that. And my uncle Louis probably was the first person who really stood by me and said, you've got to go to school and you've got to figure out what you want to do. And so I knew that I wanted to go into mental health. It was kind of a given from probably in second grade when I lived in I shouldn't say second grade, it was probably first grade when I lived in Iceland. I would take lunches to the gate guards. Our house was not far from the gate guard. So I'd truck through the snow and I would make raisin bread and bologna sandwiches for the gate guards. I know that sounds really disgusting, but they ended up liking them. And so I would take them lunch every day. And so when we would go through the gates, you'd get checked, your cars would get searched all the time. And my mom said I was coming through one time, and my friends call me Tammy, by the way. So I'll tell you that in a minute. But so they're like, oh, hi, Tammy. And my mom's like, how do you know my daughter? And they're like, oh, she brings us lunch every day. And then they just waved her through. And I think my mom might have been smuggling some cigarettes through that day. So she was all happy. So she started packing the lunches for me to take to the gate guards after that. So I just loved Iceland. I loved all of that. And I just really, again, had great people around me. So when I was 19, I moved out of my house and went to Florida. And I met this gentleman who introduced me to my first counselor that I went to, Dr. Deshawn. He was brilliant. He was doing mindfulness, guided imagery. He was really encouraging me to work through the trauma, but in a really informed way. He didn't just jump in and start working on trauma. He started working on me as a person, and calming down the anxiety, and really addressing the PTSD and the things that were so relevant in my head. So when I got that really good mental health, I knew this is what I'm going to do for a living. And he hooked me onto this book called Dibs in Search of Self by Virginia Axline. And I read that book and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And then I just started on this journey of doing that. And I went in the Air Force to pay for college. I really wanted to be, dependent on only me at that point. And so I knew I had to find a way to pay for college. So I went in the Air Force and loved every second of that. And then I got accepted to Case Western for graduate school. And I went and I haven't looked back. It's been wonderful.
Gotcha. And so early on in your career, after you got out of the Air Force, you went and got your degree.
I did.
Get your bachelor's degree, and then get your master's degree.
I did. In the middle, I got a teaching certificate and I taught high school history.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. Kind of a weird thing, right? So,
Well, it's interesting because I think there's quite a few people that I've known that went the teaching route and then later went back and got their master's in some type of behavioral health, either social work or in mental health counseling, and I'm in my early 50s, and the LCPC or the LPC didn't exist 20
right.
25 years ago. And so that's a newer, and so you had to either get a PhD or you had to become an LCSW, and those were the
Right.
only options in the early, from like mid 90s and before. So
Right, right. Yeah, and that's about when I went to graduate school was in the mid 90s. So, went in the Air Force, did everything a little bit backwards, went in the Air Force, then went to college, then had babies, then went to graduate school. So,
sure.
yeah, so it's definitely, I love that we're able to do that though. And I love mentoring young people who come to me and are talking about going into mental health. And they're like, well, I just don't want to go to school for that long. And I talk about the LPC and the MFTs and the social work and the different things that they can do to really get into this field and be really, really good at it.
And it's interesting. That's probably one of the things that I do as well. I do quite a bit of, I mean, some of it comes probably from doing it for 32 years now. That's one aspect of it, but I, believe so strongly in what we do, and so strongly in being in this particular way of being able to help people. I know for me, I, I got my bachelor's degree in psychology when I was a competitive athlete, and so I was more focused on bodybuilding, but I happened to stay in school. And when I finished my degree, I had probably another year to 2 years of competing, and then that ended, and I had my degree, but I was definitely lost and had no
Mm,
idea who Kevin was, let alone what was I supposed to do. And so I had no idea what social work was, or what could social work be outside of Department of Children and Family Services. Outside of
right.
that, child welfare, I had no idea. And for me, it has really been the ticket to allow me to do many different things, clinical social work and school social work being one of them. but
Mhm.
but there's a whole nother aspect of a business component and
Oh,
leadership
right.
development and all that. So
Yeah, and I think the important piece is that, if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking about going into the mental health field, you hit it right on the head. There's so much you can do. I own my own private practice in Ohio for 6 years. I, you know, have like I've written children's books. I've been in education, teaching seminars, but I have also taught, at the university level. So I've done so many different things with this degree because it's just such a valuable degree to have, and you really get to branch out and explore who you are. And I think we keep growing when we can branch out a little bit. I think if you're really stifled, it's hard. And that's what I love about the mental health field is that we can really do so many different things and tap into sides of us that I never knew. I have to, you said something about you didn't really know who Kevin was. There was a time I didn't know who I was. I was so lost and just trying to figure out how to deal with some of the pain that I had been through that I wasn't really paying attention too much to what I could accomplish. And when I started learning about the brain and the impact of trauma on the brain, that's when it all started to heal with me. I started going, "Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense." Now it makes sense why I couldn't focus. Now it makes sense why I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that. And once it started making sense, I knew even more I had to teach about it.
sure.
And that's what kind of led me to writing books. But I'll wait till you get there before I go there.
Well, and I think that is something that I had just come across again, and it's one of those things that we see it all the time with our clients, and for some of us in our own experience, one aspect that happens to us physically and emotionally is when a trauma event happens, and our body remembers that, it becomes bookmarked, at that particular time, and but a second part of that many times we don't really take into account is then the story that we're telling ourselves
Hmm.
as a result of that trauma. um,
Right.
and if there wasn't some level of intervention that came in at that time period, then that story that we're telling ourselves becomes our reality, and we have this physiological response that also is tied to it. And so,
Hmm.
just like you were just saying, is, oh, no wonder I was having a hard time concentrating, or I felt so hyper vigilant. And well,
Hmm.
that's what happens when we grow up in a living environment that is aggressive and hostile.
Exactly, exactly. And talk about that story that you remember. I have a very vivid story or event that happened in my life, and I remember. I can honestly sit back now and go, "That's the exact moment I started to believe this lie." And it wasn't until I recognized what the lie was that I was able to then step back and go, okay. And for everybody, the lie is going to be different, right? It's going to be, I'm not worth protecting, I'm not worth caring for, I'm not good enough, I'm not, fill in the blank of whatever the lie is. But I think when you can get back and recognize that moment that lie became your truth,
Yeah,
you can look at the situation. Like I can look back at the situation and I can analyze it now and go, that's not what was meant at all.
yeah,
That's not the comment that was made by my mother was not what she meant at that moment. And so now as an adult, I can look back and go, okay, this is what she really meant in that moment. And so then it changes your whole narrative of who you are moving forward. But unfortunately, I think so many people get stuck in that lie that they don't recognize it's a lie.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
and sometimes, because there are, in that particular case, you could see that what mom said versus what mom's intent was not congruent. Other times we're going to have circumstances where maybe the intent, because of what they were going through, was to cause harm,
right.
out of frustration or substance use or whatever it may be.
Right, exactly.
uh, but that doesn't mean that it has to be my truth today, right? Doesn't mean,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and so so I think there, I talk a lot about when I'm doing teaching, especially with my therapist, or with clients, is that when we when we have some type of trauma wound,
Mhm.
um, and then we make a promise to ourselves not to feel that way again, or to get hurt
Mm,
again, or to feel that
mhm.
vulnerability, then we start developing a false self. And you
Exactly.
refer to it as the lie, but
Mhm.
whatever words we use, it's that
Right.
it's not who we are. We're who we were authentically created to be.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the more you address it within yourself and you're willing to go to counseling or how what if there's other some people go to a spiritual person to get
Mhm.
guidance. Whatever you do, I think if you're able to recognize that you're going to face this and you're going to get through it and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, the truth that the pain's already happened and we survived that so we can survive the memory and working through it as well. And I think that was one of the things that I had to really tell myself too, that I could get through that. But you talked about this visceral response, this, the stomach aches, the headaches, the this, that, whatever your body is saying to you. Once you recognize that too, and that was what Dr. Deshawn really helped me do. He really helped me focus on like, what are you feeling right now? I don't like that feeling. I don't want that feeling.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, the feeling's just a feeling,
Mhm.
right? So what is the Kevin? You might know this, but I can't remember it off the cuff. But there's a actual feeling only lasts a few seconds. We hold
Yep.
on to the rest of it
Yep.
and make it blow it up like a big balloon, right?
Yep.
So it's once you can recognize that within yourself and go, okay, you know what? Yeah, my stomach is hurting right now. This is a sign that I'm feeling anxious, but I'm okay. I check for safety. I look around and I go, okay, I'm okay,
Yep. Yep.
and then I can do some deep breathing and
Yeah, and that ability to ground yourself and learning how to ground yourself and recognizing that, it's actually February 28th of 2022. It's not
right,
some other time period, right? And so,
exactly,
I mean, that part I think is key, to being able to go, what I'm experiencing is a symptom. It isn't necessarily the problem.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Yeah. Well, and I do quite a bit of research around the topic of young adult suicide and
Mm,
working with active military, with suicide and suicide in general. And there's a whole story of how I got involved with that. But with some of the research I was going through just in this past year was that suicidal ideation is is a less accurate predictor for, a completion of suicide than hopelessness. So if a
mm,
person is indicating that they're a sense of hopeless, and if that has been a long drawn out hopelessness, meaning over time, and there's layers of why they are sensing and experiencing hopelessness, that is much more pervasive and a stronger indicator of a suicide attempt or a completed suicide attempt than the thought of suicide themselves, because the thought of suicidal ideation is just that. It may just be a thought.
right,
It may not necessarily have any, uh, more roots to it than that. Should we definitely note and take, ask questions about what is that going, what's happening with that. But I've had clients that have been upset because they were upset about having a thought about taking their own life, and they were more upset about the fact that they had the thought than the thought in itself actually warranted in
right,
itself, and so
right. Yeah,
so we talk about this idea of it's like a cloud that comes by. It's just a thought, doesn't mean that it has to warrant any more, energy than it being just a thought.
exactly. Oh my gosh, yeah. You and Dr. Deshawn, you're kind of like the same person.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he was teaching
Mhm.
me. And I love that. I love that whole understanding that you give to clients that is so valuable because you get stuck and you start perseverating on those thoughts. And then it becomes a bigger thing than just a thought that's passing.
Yeah. So I want to jump to,
Yeah.
something that you shared with me recently, and then I have a whole story behind that. But one of the things, and you had mentioned it, is that you had written a couple children's books, and
Yes.
and the one was, ice cream cone feelings, and then
Yes.
there's a squirrel in my tummy. And so
Yes.
so kind of tell us a little bit about what was the inspiration for those two stories, and then what was
Mhm.
that experience like regarding the writing of them, and what's come from it. So
Yeah, so I'll start with ice cream cone feelings. I worked as a school social worker after I finished my master's degree, and I was working with kids. And a teacher said, to this little boy in the classroom, look, your feelings are like scoops of ice cream. They're going to get mixed up with each other, and unless you figure it out. It's going to be messy. And I was like, well, that's a really cool concept. So years went by, and I kept going, I'm going to write this book, and I would use this concept in my therapy with kids. So when I was doing therapy, I was working predominantly with children. I did see clients of all ages, but I was very, very focused on trauma with children. So I would be in there working with them and I'm using it. I'm like, gosh, I really need a book on this. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write it. I've got it in my head. I'm going to write it. So wrote Ice Cream Cone Feelings. Absolutely love it. I think it's a fun way to talk to kids. I've done healthy things with kids where I've sat down and did, frozen yogurt at events that I've been invited to where we do healthy alternatives for, versus all the sugar of ice cream. So we've been able to play around a little bit with it to give them some healthy ideas, both from a physical standpoint, but also from the emotional standpoint. And I'll share a story of this little boy. One time I was in the classroom reading this book, and this little guy is raising his hand in the middle of the story. And when you're reading, you're trying to get through the book, and you can't let first graders, second graders talk because they'll talk the whole time. So, but he couldn't keep himself still and blurted out before I could say anything. I have a scoop. It's scared. And before I could say, I'm going to talk to you about this before, very quickly he said, I'm scared because my dad hits my mom and it scares me. And I said, honey, I'm really, really proud of you for telling me about that scoop. I want to talk to you more about this after class or after I read the story. And he goes, and I go, but you don't forget. Okay. And he goes, I won't forget. And he goes, you're not going to forget, are you? And I said, absolutely not. They want us to talk to them. They want us to ask questions. They want us to hear them. And so after we got done reading the book, I went over with him and his teacher. He talked a teeny bit to me about what was going on. The mom intervened. We called children's services to get them involved. The parents actually ended up writing me a thank you note
Mm.
because they were able to get the help that they needed. And so it was really, it had a good ending to the story. And, obviously the teacher's not going to tell me too much more because of HIPAA and everything else, but they were able to get help. So I was very, very excited that that book had that kind of an impact. But I have this from a lot of different kids, and it's been really. I have to tell you, if I'd had a, a modality like this as a child, where somebody would have said to me, speak about you, it's okay to talk about how you feel, it's okay to stand up and say this doesn't feel right. I would have talked a lot sooner than I did. I would have, the fear and the threats wouldn't have meant as much to me if I had known this was wrong. And not only do I feel like it's wrong, but it's wrong, and I have other people saying it's wrong, and I can go get help. And so that was my motivation to really write these books. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on There's a Squirrel in My Tummy, because that book, to me, it was the most critical thing I've done in my career. It's probably the most valuable thing that I've done to date, and I am so proud of it because I wrote the book. I have to tell you the funniest story. I wrote this book, and then I get all the illustrations done, and I'm going to print on Monday. And on Friday, I'm reading it, and I'm like, this is horrible. This doesn't say what I want it to say. I got to go rewrite it. And I remember going to my friend's house. She's got this beautiful kind of oasis of a yard. And I went over there and I just took all the illustrations and I rewrote the entire book on Saturday to the illustrations, which was really hard to get my point across of what I wanted to say. And I think it comes across beautifully. Everybody writes, there's a lot of books out there that talk about good touch, bad touch, or talk about strangers, or talk about bullying, or they talk about all these things, but very few people talk about the gut instinct that you get that tells you something isn't right.
Mhm.
And it's that one thing that we can take with us for the rest of our life. We need it in everything that we do. We're going to be talking to strangers. When parents say don't talk to them, they're a stranger, I always think to myself, wow, you need to talk to strangers. You're going to do it the rest of your life. How about what made that person a good stranger? And so my son and I, after I finished the book and it had gone to print, it was at the publishers. No, I take that back. It hadn't gone to the publishers yet. It was a couple of weeks before that, because the story is in the back of the book. We're at Old Navy, and this little guy is next to me, and he goes, I can make you freeze for 10 seconds. And I look at him, I go, really? And he goes, yeah, you want to see? And I go, sure. And he goes, freeze. And so I played along and I froze and he counted to 10. I was like, wow, cool trick. His mom's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's okay. And then my son, who was 19 at the time, looks at me and he goes, Mom, you shouldn't talk to him. You're a stranger. And the little boy and the mom was still standing there. I said, Luke, that little boy needs to know that there are safe strangers in the world. I mean, sometimes we have to rely on a stranger. And I go, he needs to know what would have made me a bad stranger. Well, what would have made me a bad stranger? Hey, I want to take you to the dressing room to show my son that trick. You want to go with me? Or, hey, I've got something in the car for you. Those things would have made me a bad stranger. Just playing along and entertaining his magic trick, that's not making me a bad stranger. Somebody telling you you have nice boots, and you saying thank you, that doesn't make you a bad stranger. If I carry it on, maybe it does. And so it's a really valuable way for parents to teach their kids how to trust that gut instinct that says something's not right here, and I need to go to somebody and talk to them. And if a child unfortunately is being hurt at home, it teaches a child that there are safe adults out there, that we do care and that we want to hear what they have to say, and that we do want to help them. And so those were my motivations for those two books. And I'm just super proud of them.
No, I think they were great, great. They're great tools because we have this term that I would definitely remember in spite of in spite of my awareness, I still did it anyways.
Mhm.
I grew up in the essentially the city that I live in now, and when I was a kid, I remember you would wake up in the morning and you would be, other than coming home for lunch, you were in the neighborhood, and you knew a certain proximity that you could be, but you were all over the neighborhood, and there were
Right.
certain areas you knew you weren't supposed to go to, down by the railroad tracks and across certain streets because they were busier streets. But for the most part, we had what it feels like, or it felt like back then, free reign.
Right.
When my kids were little, I, I I don't know where he went, meaning me, where he went, but I
they
I was very much aware of where my kids were all the time when I was on watch,
right.
and I was with them all the time, and I think back then I didn't know about this term, but this I never saw myself as being a helicopter dad, or trying to move things out of so they wouldn't have any obstacles in that. But I think just as you were talking about the being able to differentiate, helping a young person differentiate between a good person you don't know and a person that could be dangerous that you don't know,
Right.
and that is a life skill, right? That's a life
Oh,
skill
absolutely.
that will benefit a male or a female in college when they go away,
Hmm.
when they
Yep.
start jobs, dating. This, it carries on to be able to differentiate, um, because like you said, there's always going to be people that you don't know, regardless if it's at the Starbucks or it's at a new job location.
Right. And it's trusting, our body speaks to us before our brain catches up sometimes. You'll be somewhere and somebody will give you that really, I call that the squirrel's running around in your tummy. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, there's a problem here. And you can't figure out what it is. You're kind of looking around going, why am I feeling this way? And I've just learned to trust that feeling. Like, there's something that my brain is picking up on that it's not processing fast enough yet. But my stomach, because that's where I carry all my stuff, my stomach is just like telling me something's not right here. And so I've really learned to trust that. And even writing that book, it taught me even more of it because I had to really sit down and look at what I was trying to teach
Mhm.
in that story. And what I was trying to teach was, how do you really trust that gut feeling? And you said it perfectly. Sometimes you're not going to listen to the gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
I dated this guy once, and I had this gut feeling like a couple times that, like, not good. And then one day he swore at me and yelled at me, and I ended it that day. I was like, we're done. It took me a little while to get there, but I had these little warning signs ahead of time before that this probably wasn't a healthy relationship. And fortunately, I realized very quickly that it wasn't a healthy relationship before it got too serious. But we just kind of ignore some of those signs. And I think especially when you've been through some sort of trauma, you're taught to ignore those things. You're taught to dismiss them. You're taught to not talk about it, or to it doesn't matter what you feel. So when you grow up that way, it's even harder to move forward and say, and I don't remember exactly how you worded it, but you don't you were talking about relationships, and you were talking about uh, you really trusting yourself. You don't do that. And so it's really hard, and you sabotage. You don't want to be vulnerable. That's what you were talking about. You don't want to be vulnerable, and you don't want to do those things because it's scary, and you don't trust yourself. And so the more you learn to trust that gut instinct, the more you learn to trust yourself. The more you trust yourself, the more you're able to be vulnerable with somebody else, because you recognize, okay, wait a minute, not all people are horrible. But you also recognize that you're going to have disagreements with people, and it doesn't have to be the end of the world, and it doesn't have to be so far to the right that it's horribly abusive, or so far to the left that it's vacant of all emotion. That there's this nice little place in the middle that becomes good and healthy. And so, and you might veer to the right a little or to the left a little, but as long as you're not veering more than 10 degrees either way, you're doing pretty good, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're going to lose your temper sometimes and raise your voice. Sometimes you're going to pull away from somebody for a little while just to kind of regroup. But if you're analyzing in those moments, I think that's when you really have the most growth.
Well, and I think, having obviously read both of these books, and I'm assuming the Ice Cream Cone Feelings was the first book you wrote.
It was, yes.
And I think, what I really liked about that book was, just like you said, it gave the main character, right? His mom
Hmm.
walked him through, a really bad day, right? And
Hmm.
and being able to identify what was going on, and the power of being able to talk to a safe person was, it showed in a very quick way. And I think with kids, especially with that type of bad day, it can dissipate that quickly.
Right.
And it's, I have to tell you, this is my, because I believe so much in the whole social work part of it, and the
Yeah.
mental health part of it. So I'm very fortunate. My sister-in-law is an LCSW, and she works at KP. My son got his MSW in December of 20, and my daughter right now is doing her internship at KP, and she's working in one of our schools that we have a contract with. Well,
Oh, nice.
she's working with K through third graders, and so I think I showed her. I said, "Hey, Sierra, check these two books out." And so I think she went through them, and then she told me last week that she had created an activity. She brought the Ice Cream Feelings
Oh,
book and created an activity where they make the I think there's a second grader group, and second or third graders, and they make an ice cream cone
hmm.
out of paper, and then they have uh, construction paper, I think, to do the feelings, and then they would talk
Hmm.
about when they felt disappointed, or when they felt sad or mad, or whatever it was.
You just triggered a memory with me. I brought this into my niece's. She's a teacher as well. Thank you for doing that. And I love that. And that's the activity we do as well. And I took this into my niece's fifth grade class. So you would think fifth graders, it's a little too babyish for them. So we read the book to them. Some of them were like kind of like, I'm like, okay, now I want you all to create ice cream cones. Like, go back to your desk. Where I just want to know how you're feeling. When I took all the papers and I sat down with my niece after the fact, I said, "Oh, was this kid in the classroom?" And she was like, "Yes." And I'm like, I looked at another one. I'm like, "What is this kid?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, how are you doing this?" And I'm like, I was watching their body language. I was watching how they interacted with other people, but they were. I am angry. I feel alone. I hate bullying. I blah blah blah. And I'm like, how much is this kid being bullied? And she's like, oh my gosh, we're working on it. It's just brutal. And so, so these kids are going to tell you so much in these ice cream cones, and you can do it very simplistically with just color, crayons and a piece of paper, or you can get elaborate and cut out the things. I have an ice cream cone in my office, so the kids are able to identify what scoop is what feeling, and so then they do that. But you can really stretch on that, and we have some curriculum developed around ice cream cone feelings, and there's a swirl in my tummy, meeting the benchmarks and the criteria for each one of them, because there's so many things you can learn from these books, and it's just amazing to me. So I'm thrilled to hear that.
Well, it's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I had an author, Sherry Barch, on, and she wrote a book called Heaven's Bell, and that was written for, I think it was fourth to sixth graders, or fifth to seventh graders
Mhm.
type of thing. And it was interesting because, similar to these two books, that they're not only beneficial for the designated identified age group, but they're also beneficial for older, because the story's still the truth, it's
Exactly.
really that metaphor that allows us then to put ourselves into it, and how does that apply to me? And I think that's the value for this, but it's also a tool, right, to be
Oh,
able to.
absolutely. And I don't know about you, but I use children's books a lot with my adult clients
Mhm.
because they are so busy. Like Tiger, Is It True by Byron Katie. I use that book with my adult clients all the time, as well as mine. And you know, gosh, there's The Day the Crayons Quit. I use that one as well about all those different feelings. But I give them to my adolescents to read because they're not going to read 10-chapter book on feelings.
Right,
They're just too busy.
right.
So I'll use these books a lot to help them learn a skill I want them to learn. It doesn't matter the age.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that is, parables, proverbs,
Hmm.
Aesop's fables, fairy
Yep.
tales in themselves. I think that's the power of those teaching formats, is that we can all, at some level, we can relate to it, and it actually disarms us, because if it is written in this, more succinctly but simpler,
Hmm.
through a metaphor, then I think, like you said, it can broaden the application. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
and I can just, I can see myself, if I had written something similar to yourself about the squirrel in my tummy, that I could see that I'd get the illustration, and all of a sudden going, this, oh, I got to do something different here, right? And then change it,
Right.
at the 11th hour. But because because it's trusting that gut feeling about,
Right.
this is not going to come across the way I want it to, so I need to revamp. So.
Yeah. My whole goal with A Squirrel in My Tummy was to teach that true feeling of how do I trust myself. I remember growing up and I was taught not to trust myself. I was taught not to trust that feeling, not to listen to what my body was saying to me, and more so just to shut it off, and to not, and unfortunately you not only miss out on, well, you can avoid some of the bad things when you totally shut and isolate yourself, but you miss out on all the really good things. I look at these children who are in my life now, my nieces and nephews, and my great nieces and nephews. I don't have any real grandchildren yet, but I got enough of those little ones around me, and I love just being able to hear them and teach them that they can really stand up for themselves, that they can just really be who they want to be, and be okay with it. And we have this example from yesterday where I took my one little niece to the Mardi Gras parade, and one of the guys had this gorgeous bead that was really super cool, and he was like, oh, he goes, give me a kiss on the cheek and you can have it. And I looked at her and I said, you don't have to do that. You can, if you want to give him a kiss on the cheek, you can. She knew who he was. And she gave him, she goes, yeah. And she gave him a kiss on the cheek and she took the beads. And then we talked about it later, like, she's like, I'm like, what's your favorite beads? And she said that one. And we were able to talk about it and process it, and I was able to say to her, and you don't have to, you never have to do something for something.
Mhm.
You, if you wanted beads, we'd find a way to get you beads without you having to do anything, like giving somebody a kiss on the cheek or hugging somebody.
Mhm.
When my nephew, one comes in the house, and he's not a hugger, he's not a toucher, he doesn't want to, he's just not his language. Like, gifts are his language. Don't hug me, don't touch me, right? And so when he walks in the house, I'm like, what's up? And he's like, what's up? And everybody else is like, ta ta. That's what they call me. And they come in running in, they're giving me hugs, and I'm like, hi. And so, but not him. With him, it's like, a nod, and that's it.
Sure.
So, and it's recognizing and being okay with that, and teaching him it's okay to be that way. Not to be rude, obviously, but it's okay to not hug me when you walk in the door.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force you to do something you don't want to do, right?
Right.
Or and I want to teach my kids that. So,
Sure.
and I
Sure.
want to teach the kids in the world that too.
Yeah.
That you can trust your gut instincts. You can say no. People have to listen when you say no, but also recognizing that when you don't feel right about something, even if it's something as simple as I put my hand on your shoulder, you get to say, I don't like the way that feels.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's a fine line, isn't it? Like, in some regards, because you want to teach kids to be respectful, obviously, but you also want to keep them safe. and make them feel empowered. So
Yeah. And I think that is definitely, as you know, as a therapist, that is, if we can do it at an early age and help them differentiate between that intuition, that gut feeling, that sensing that something is uncomfortable, and then the learning that we do, that everyone that I don't know their first, middle, last name, social security is a stranger. and and
right.
and because sometimes, and that's, I know for me, that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn going through my own work, was that I was such a thinker about um about survival, about being able to not get hurt, and is that I would overthink and everything, and I wouldn't trust, those time period when I would maybe see when it was, wrong, or there was danger, but then I wouldn't be able to always trust when somebody was, when it was safe, or when it was,
Right.
really, when it was being helpful, because
Exactly.
what I perceived as a threat may not have actually been a threat. It might have been my translation of the scenario.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I love that you're doing this kind of stuff. So people can really learn the difference. It's not about, it is about, you know, obviously giving them resources, but it's also hearing those words being said, and that you went through something and you survived it, and you came out stronger, and helping the world. And that's my passion. When we started off this conversation about what do you love to do, well, I think this is not really work for me.
Hmm.
People are always like, oh, you work so much. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I work so much, because
Hmm.
I love what I do. So, if I'm putting in 60 or 70 hours in the week doing creative work stuff, quote unquote work stuff, I'm really doing what I'm passionate about. And when you do what you're passionate about, you can't put a clock on it.
Right.
You have to say, okay, no, I love this. This is what I love.
Yeah, very much so. So speaking of that, Sherry, not
Yes.
sorry, not Sherry,
That's
Teresa.
okay. You're in last week
I
still.
was last week's, yeah.
Yeah.
Another creative like yourself, but what's in store for you? What are some things that you're looking
Yeah.
at wanting to do in 22? What are some things that you're looking at wanting to, some goals that you have coming up?
Well, first we'll start with refresh. Obviously, really developing a learning and development program throughout refresh that really is exciting for people. Taps into the resources that we already have at refresh, and hopefully recruiting people that we don't have at refresh who are super talented, because we really want to help people. And with a large network like ours, we want all the resources we can get to help the people that we're working with. From a personal standpoint, I'm absolutely still writing. I have a book on PTSD that I'm almost done with. It's about a military service dog with PTSD. Super informative. I worked at the VA for a short period of time. I'm a veteran myself, so come from a line of veterans. Really have just this heart for military people, and for their families. I think people forget that it's not just the soldier, the airman, the Navy. It's not the people who are in the military alone who are paying a price for what our soldiers and our military folks go through. The family pays a price for it too. The family is impacted by it. So I really wanted to create something that spoke to people who are living with somebody with PTSD, understanding what it's like, helping that person through it. I can look back at my childhood and go, my father definitely had PTSD because of his abuse. My mom became her mental illness came rearing its ugly head, and she had PTSD herself from living with him, and the things that he did. So you have this whole house full of people who have PTSD. So I really have this passion towards explaining that and helping families work through it. So the book not only walks you through what does PTSD look like, but it gives some really sound things that the dog does to kind of help himself when he's feeling these things. So it not only helps the child understand what the parent may be going through, but it helps the person who has PTSD understand some ways to calm themselves down and to work through some things. So I'm in love. I am in love with that. And then I just started another. Well, I shouldn't say just started. We've been working on this for years. So Dr. Kevin Arnold out of CCBT Columbus
Right.
and I have been working on this one book on bullying. So I just started really focusing again on it because I'm like, okay, you've got to be in a really good headspace to be creative, by the way. So I'm
Hmm.
sure you know
Hmm.
that.
Yep. Yep.
So we've been really going kind of back and forth with it, and I made a commitment to finish that up in the next 3 or 4 months. So we'll hopefully get that up and out the door. But it's on bullying, and it's a really fun. It's a fun kind of. I can't say much about it because we're under a big NDA on this one. So, but it's going to be really really good, and I'm excited to get that out there. And Dr. Arnold's brilliant, so it'll be fun to work with him as we wrap up this project. So
Sure. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing and reading both those books when they get finished. And we do quite a bit of work at a couple different at KP and then Sherman and at Red Oak, working with children and working with veterans. And so I'll be and working with their families as well as first
yes,
responders. So I would definitely be interested in your as you finish up your book on PTSD. I'd
yes.
be
Well, and
interested in that.
you bring up that great point of the first responders. Uh, we that just opens up a whole nother network of children and families who really will seek value from this book. So yeah, I'm
Perfect.
excited about this. I'll definitely get you the first one of the first copies when it comes out.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Teresa, if someone was interested in contacting you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? What's the best way for them
Yeah.
to get ice cream cone feelings and
Mhm.
there's a squirrel in my tummy?
Yeah. So both of those are on Amazon. So you can just go to Amazon and look it up, and it'll be sent out the next day. So you can get them there. You can reach out to me via if it's regarding Refresh T Gasser at Refresh Mental Health. And if it's just about the books, it's Tammy Ott G. I guess that's a good time to segue into that, huh?
Sure.
Tammy Ott G at gmail.com. So my friends call me Tammy. My career wise is Theresa. Teresa's my legal name. Tammy's nowhere in my legal name, but my mother liked Tammy on my birth certificate, or called me Tammy. She thought Tammy Joan was too country. So
Mm.
she named me Theresa Jones. So there you
Oh,
go.
okay. There you go. Okay.
Yes. She
Well,
said you sounded like a country singer when we were going to call you Tammy Joan. And I was like, well, that's not a bad thing.
yeah.
So she goes, well, back in the 60s, country wasn't that popular yet. so
That's
so
good.
there I am. Yeah.
Well, Teresa, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for what
Thank
you
you.
have been doing and what you continue to do now through Refresh and through some of the other
Yes.
projects that you are doing. And I am grateful that you and our paths crossed, and
Me too.
that we can do some work together. So,
Yeah, and
again,
thank you for all you do on suicide prevention. I'm sure people who are listening to you are aware, but if you could put out that website for people, because I'll be posting this on my social medias as well,
sure.
and I'd really like people to check that out. Your nonprofit around suicide prevention is brilliant. So congratulations on a
Well, thank
very well done job.
well, thank you very much. So, um, as always, if for some reason there was something that you may have heard on the show in our conversation with Teresa regarding yourself or someone that you know, please reach out either through Teresa or myself or someone within your network regarding how to break that silence and shatter that silence around
Mm,
that, or if you're seeking to if you have that for yourself, that squirrel in your tummy, that there are good local resources to be able to seek out, and I'll make sure I put some websites in the show notes for this. But again, Teresa, thank you for
perfect.
being with us,
Thank you.
and I
Enjoyed it.
welcome everyone to be back with us next week.